What began as an innocent camping trip in upstate New York quickly spiraled into a battle for sanity when a nightmare became all too real, twisted, uncanny, and unearthly, leaving those who encountered it forever changed. In another chilling account, a listener from Kinderhook writes into us, describing a presence so surreal it defies belief, and it remains even today, stalking the backwoods. These tales, steeped in urban legend and raw first-hand terror from New York State, serve as a stark reminder that there are things out there living in the shadows, things we should truly be afraid of. Step into the abyss and welcome to Weird Encounters, a place where the ordinary fades into shadow and the unexplainable comes alive. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and join our ever-growing community of the curious. Your support is the lifeblood that keeps this channel alive. Now, prepare yourself, for what you're about to witness is not for the faint of heart. This happened earlier this fall, up in the Adirondack region of New York, near a section of forest a few miles southwest of Indian Lake. I was there with 3 close friends, people I've hiked with for years, so we're not exactly newbies to backcountry camping. We'd planned a weekend of exploring off-trail spots in the lesser-traveled areas, hoping for a good fishing hole and maybe some nice stargazing. None of us expected to leave with an experience that still makes my skin crawl just thinking about it. We set out on a Friday, parking near a logging road that branched off Route 30. The first day was uneventful, just a steady hike in. We passed a handful of small streams, hopped a few downed trees, the usual stuff. Late that afternoon, we started looking for a decent place to set up camp, somewhere near water, but out of sight from the main trails. Eventually, we found a small clearing near a trickle of a creek, which seemed perfect. As soon as we dropped our packs, though, I got this weird tingle at the back of my neck, almost like someone was watching us. I tried to ignore it, chalked it up to exhaustion or being too used to the comfort of well-worn paths. After dinner, we were just relaxing, chatting by the campfire. The forest around us was unnervingly quiet. Too quiet, in hindsight. Normally, you'd hear some crickets, maybe an owl, but there was nothing. One friend commented he felt like the woods were holding their breath, which gave me an odd chill. We eventually turned in for the night. Sometime later, I still don't know how much time passed, I woke with this jolt of panic, heart pounding, like I'd heard a sudden noise, though I couldn't remember one. It was dead silent. I unzipped my tent just enough to peek out and froze. About 10 yards away, crouched low to the ground, was something that I can only describe as a freakish humanoid figure. It looked pale or maybe grayish in the moonlight, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. The skin glistened in the faint light, like it was wet or slimy. My first thought was that it resembled some horrifying demon from a horror movie, but this was real life. The smell hit me next. This rancid, sulfuric odor that made my stomach churn. It was facing me, though its face was partially hidden by one of the tent ropes. Its eyes, from what I could see, looked almost sunken or recessed, and the mouth seemed too wide, with a bit of a protrusion around its jawline. It made no sound, but the way it stared felt evil, like it was trying to make me understand how vulnerable I was. I couldn't scream or say a word. My throat felt paralyzed. Then, slowly and deliberately, it rose up on 2 legs. Its height was hard to judge in that crouched position, but when it stood, it was at least as tall as a person, maybe taller, but hunched over. There was this slick, slurping noise as it moved, which almost made me gag. Without a glance to any of the other tents, it turned and walked deeper into the darkness, disappearing behind the tree line. The whole event lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. As soon as I regained control of my breathing, I scrambled out and shook one of my friends awake. They got startled, not understanding why I was panicking, until they caught wind of the smell lingering in the air. Another friend unzipped his tent, asking what was wrong. I was stuttering about something in the woods, and though I couldn't articulate it well, they could tell I was terrified. No one slept after that. We stoked the fire and all sat around it, scanning the darkness. I kept having the sensation that the thing was still out there, watching, but it never showed itself again that night. We decided at sunrise to head back, but that turned into a nightmare of its own. We packed up and tried to follow our GPS route out, but it was like the landscape had shifted. Trails we thought we recognized seemed to go nowhere, or we'd end up circling back to the same clearing. We're not novices at navigation. Between the four of us, we've done countless backcountry treks. This was bizarre. Each time we took what should have been the right bearing, we'd find ourselves back at a landmark we'd already passed. It was eerie and frustrating. By late afternoon, we realized we'd have to spend another night out there. That second night was worse. We made camp in a different spot, hoping to put distance between us and whatever that thing was. But as evening fell, we started hearing strange sounds, like wet, gurgling noises and occasional clicks. The forest had that same unnatural hush. I couldn't tell if the sounds were close or echoing from a distance. They seemed to come from every direction. We had just settled into our tents, trying to keep calm, when we heard footsteps. Not human footsteps, heavier, but with a strange, uneven cadence. One of my buddies whispered he thought it was circling our camp. Suddenly, my tent shook violently, as though something had gripped the top and rattled it. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My friend shouted, wanting to know if everyone was okay. Another tent got rocked right after. We scrambled out, shining flashlights, but we only caught glimpses of movement in the shadows. An elongated limb slipping behind a tree, the reflection of eyes for a split second. The smell again was overpowering. I can't overstate how sickening it was. It smelled like decay, mixed with stagnant water. We gathered around the campfire, practically huddled together as the footsteps continued circling for what felt like hours. I noticed the creatures, if there was more than one, never fully entered the light. They stayed just beyond the reach of our flashlights, occasionally letting out these low hissing sounds. The feeling of dread was almost suffocating, like we were being toyed with. At first light, the noises stopped. Exhausted, we packed up as quickly as we could. That's when I noticed something near my tent. A small skull, maybe 6 or 7 inches long, but not shaped like any animal skull I recognized. It was elongated, with odd ridges near where the eye sockets would be. The bone looked old and stained. I had this overwhelming sense I shouldn't touch it, so I left it right there. Whether it was some sort of warning or just the remains of something the creature carried, I'll never know. By sheer luck, we found a more familiar portion of the trail as we hiked out that morning. We practically raced back to the car, not stopping to rest. Once we hit the main road, it was like a dam broke, and we all started talking over each other about what happened, trying to make sense of it, throwing out every theory from a deformed animal to a Wendigo or some demonic entity. To be honest, I still don't know what we encountered. All I know is that it was real, and it felt malevolent. None of us have been back to that area since. One of my friends, who's usually the bravest, said he has nightmares about that face peering at him through his tent. I can't blame him. I haven't slept right since we got home. I keep smelling that rancid odor in my nightmares, and each time I jolt awake, my heart is racing. I'm sharing this because I need to know if anyone else has encountered something similar in the New York State forests. Whatever we ran into wasn't a bear or a trick of the light. It was intelligent enough to stalk us, harass us, and vanish when we tried to shine light on it. If anyone has had a similar experience or has any explanation, I'd really like to hear it. Right now, all I have are unanswered questions and a lingering sense of dread every time I think about going back into the woods. I just want people to be aware that there might be more lurking out in those woods than we ever thought possible. This came in from one of our listeners. I've never shared anything like this before, but your YouTube channel seems like a place where people won't call me crazy. I'm from the Hudson Valley region, right near Kinderhook and Valati in upstate New York, an area that's no stranger to spooky folklore. There's the famous Headless Horseman story in Sleepy Hollow, all kinds of ghost tales up and down the Hudson, and rumor has it, even the Catskills themselves are riddled with urban legends about strange beasts or spirits. But what I've experienced over the past few months is far more unsettling than any storybook legend. People around here call it the Kinderhook creature, and I'm concerned it might be more than just a local tall tale. I inherited my parents' old property just outside of Valachi. It's tucked away near a small creek surrounded by dense woods. During the daytime, it's peaceful enough, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze, that sort of idyllic country vibe. But at night, the atmosphere changes. My first encounter happened one evening in early spring. I was on the back porch taking in the quiet. The frogs and crickets were making their usual racket when, all of a sudden, everything went silent in an instant. It was eerie, like a power switch had been flipped. Then I heard heavy breathing from somewhere beyond the edge of my flashlight beam. Not a deer huff or a typical animal snort. This was deeper, almost labored. When I aimed my light into the trees, I caught the reflection of eyes roughly 7 or 8 feet off the ground. That alone made me freeze. They blinked out of sight so quickly, I started questioning whether I imagined it. The next morning, I took a walk down to the creek and saw footprints in the muddy bank. They were deeply pressed and larger than any human foot I'd ever seen. I tried telling myself it might be some odd pattern in the earth or maybe an animal's overlapping tracks, but something about the shape was unsettling. It reminded me of those Bigfoot sightings you hear about on TV, but this was right here in my backyard. Later that week, I started hearing stories from neighbors I'd known for years. One told me about late-night activity he'd witnessed near his garbage cans, something very large lifting them and carrying them off into the woods. By morning, the cans were found crushed, like they'd been squeezed. Another neighbor recalled that in the 1980s, people complained of strange howling at night, beyond anything local wildlife would make. A farmer out near the outskirts of Kinderhook apparently abandoned his property after repeated incidents where his livestock disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Folks whispered, "Kinderhook creature," but no one wanted to talk too much. This region has always been proud and private. People tend to keep unusual experiences to themselves. As I continued visiting the old house, I live in Albany full-time, so I only go down on weekends. Unsettling things kept happening. One night, well past midnight, I heard something moving around the porch. It sounded almost like a person pacing, heavy footfalls, thump, thump, but spaced too far apart for a normal stride. My porch light blinked for a second, and in that flicker, I thought I caught sight of a massive shape passing by the window. It had a broad, muscular outline, and the top of its head seemed a bit pointed or sloped. The silhouette vanished almost as soon as it appeared. I had this overwhelming sense that if I opened the door, I might be staring right at it. The following day, I walked the property line and noticed odd marks on some of the trees, large scratches or gouges. They were higher than I could reach, even if I stood on tiptoe. We don't have many bears in this exact area, and these gouges weren't in the typical bear claw pattern anyway. A few of the trees seemed almost bent or snapped part way up. Could a severe storm do that? Possibly, but they were freshly broken, and the wood had that raw, splintered look. It felt more deliberate than weather-related. I started asking around about the Kinderhook creature. Some folks recalled hearing about a Bigfoot type being that roamed the region in the 80s, causing property damage and scaring people enough that some families even moved away. A local historian mentioned that sightings go back further than that. There are old references in certain 19th century diaries about a wild man haunting the Catskills. One entry described a large figure with unusual strength, glimpsed at dusk near a water source. It made me think of my experiences by the creek. Things took a turn for the worse about a month ago when, while clearing brush one afternoon, I sensed a powerful odor, like wet fur mixed with an earthy musk. I've come across fox dens and the occasional skunk, but this was far stronger, almost like the reek of an unkempt zoo enclosure. I turned in time to see a swaying motion among the trees, as though something big had just slipped out of sight. My heart pounded. I stood there for a good minute, half expecting it to step forward. Eventually the smell faded, but the uneasy feeling remained. A few days after that, I spoke with an elderly couple living closer to the Catskill Creek. They claimed they've had bizarre encounters on and off for decades, strange noises at night, missing pets, and sightings of an enormous figure lurking near the tree line. They said that years ago, they tried reporting it to local authorities but were brushed off. They ended up installing heavy-duty floodlights and avoiding the woods after sunset. They called it an ongoing nightmare, something they've learned to live with rather than fight. Last weekend, the tension really amped up. I spent the night at the house alone, hoping to catch up on some renovation work. Around 2 a.m., loud thumps echoed outside, like rocks or logs being banged together. I peered out a side window and saw a big shape dart behind the shed. I barely got a glimpse, but it appeared hunched, with a strange fluidity in its movement, faster than I'd have expected for something that large. I heard deep, labored breathing again, accompanied by what I can only describe as a low, rumbling growl. I didn't dare go outside. I just sat there, gripping my flashlight. After what felt like hours, the sounds faded. In the morning, I ventured out to find several large stones scattered in odd spots near the shed, as if they'd been tossed. A few gouges in the ground suggested something had been scraping or digging. At that point, I realized that I'm probably dealing with something that's not just passing through. It seems to be marking territory, or maybe trying to intimidate me. And it's working. I've never felt such dread on my own property before. I've heard theories that it could be a normal animal with unusual growth, a feral human, or even an undiscovered species. Others lean toward something more paranormal, like an interdimensional being or a shapeshifter. I can't say I believe in all that, but I also can't deny what I've experienced. The enormous footprints, the fleeting glimpses of a hulking figure, the stench, the bizarre noises. None of it feels like a standard wild animal. This is my first time writing to anyone about this. If you decide to share it on your channel, maybe someone else in the capital region or the Catskills has had similar experiences and can offer guidance. Right now, I'm oscillating between genuine fear for my safety and sheer curiosity about what exactly roams these woods. Part of me wants to set up trail cams, but another part worries that if I capture something conclusive, I'll never be able to unsee it. And if it's truly territorial, could that provoke it further? I hope this account helps shed some light on the ongoing reports of the Kinderhook creature. It's not just an urban legend from decades past. Something is still out there. I just want to understand what I'm dealing with, and whether there's any safe way to coexist, or if it's time to abandon the property for good. I'm from the South Hills area of Pittsburgh, not far from Peters Township. If you're a local, you might have heard about the place they call Hell. It's this patch of woods off some back roads, near the edges of Peters and Venetia, with a nasty reputation linked to an old legend about a man called Hatchet Jack. Maybe you've already heard the story. He supposedly killed his entire family with a hatchet back in the 1970s, then vanished. People say the woods themselves turned evil after that, or maybe they always were, and Hatchet Jack was just an extension of whatever lives back there. I'd been warned about that area since I was a teenager. A cousin's friend said they found weird symbols carved into the tree bark, and someone else claimed they heard unearthly shrieking late at night. I never took those tales too seriously, but earlier this month my friend, let's call him D, convinced me to drive out there and check it out. It was a Wednesday night, around 8 p.m. mid-October. We picked that time because it was just after sunset, and we thought we'd have enough light to at least navigate. I realize now how clueless we were, even with flashlights. We parked off a gravel pull-off near an old dirt path that's rarely used anymore. There used to be farmland there, now it's mostly new developments creeping up, but you can still find pockets of dense woods if you go deep enough. The plan was just a short walk in, maybe snap some photos for Dee's personal ghost hunting collection, then head out. Easy. The minute we left the car, though, I noticed the air felt different. The woods were dead silent. No crickets, no leaves rustling in the breeze, nothing. Then, not more than 5 minutes in, we come across this old, half-rotten fence post with a chunk of what looked like animal fur stuck to it. Could have been a coyote or a deer brushed against it, sure, but something about it just set me on edge. Dee joked it was probably Hatchet Jack's doing, but even he sounded nervous. We wandered further along a faint trail, stepping over fallen logs and tangles of brush. The smell changed, too. It went from that damp, earthy scent to something stale and almost metallic. At first I thought I was imagining it, but then Dee said he noticed the same thing. We were about 100 yards in when we saw the first real sign that something was off. There was an old oak tree with branches that looked twisted and gnarled, more so than the other trees around it. And right at its base was a cluster of mushrooms, all shriveled and black, like they'd been torched. Dee was going to take a picture when suddenly we heard this faint clanking sound, like metal scraping against metal, but distant. We both froze, shining our flashlights in every direction. I had this intense feeling that we were being watched. At that moment, I recalled the old local legend that says, if you stay in those woods too long, Hatchet Jack will appear behind you, silently. I tried shaking it off, told myself it was just jitters. Still, my heart was pounding so loud I could hear my pulse in my ears. Dee whispered that we should keep going. He's the braver one, I guess. We followed the sound of that clanking noise, or at least tried to figure out where it was coming from. It seemed to echo around the trees, sometimes from one direction, sometimes from another. Eventually, we stumbled onto what looked like a neglected clearing. Weeds up to our waist, vines strangling old fence posts, and the rotting remains of what might have been a small outbuilding a century ago, possibly related to the farmland that used to be around here. That's when we saw what looked like a hatchet stuck in a tree stump. No joke, it was rusted, the handle half-eaten by termites, but it definitely resembled a hatchet. Dee was about to approach it when we heard a hushed rasp, like a deep inhalation right behind us. My flashlight flickered, and it was brand new batteries, which really freaked me out. That's when we caught a glimpse of something. It was tall, or at least seemed that way, partially hidden behind a tree trunk. The shape was all wrong for a person, too angular, and the arms or limbs seemed elongated. I couldn't see a face, just a distorted silhouette. We both just stood there, frozen, staring. Dee was the first to step back, and as soon as he did, the figure was gone. Not gone as in it ran away, but more like it vanished between one blink and the next. We started hearing these soft, almost rhythmic thuds, like something hitting a tree trunk over and over, but from multiple directions. It felt like we'd stepped into some twisted game. Dee whispered that we should run. I agreed, but for some reason, my legs felt cemented to the ground. It was like I was in a dream, unable to move no matter how hard I tried. Then the tree line ahead of us flickered with a dim red glow, almost like an ember. It pulsed once, twice, and vanished. I know some locals speculate the woods are demonically influenced, that maybe what happened with Hatchet Jack's family left a permanent stain on the land. Before this night, I would have rolled my eyes at the idea of evil land. But the oppressive sense of dread was unlike anything I've felt before. Even Dee, who never shuts up, was at a loss for words. We finally managed to force ourselves to move, half stumbling as we made our way back. But the path we came in on seemed different, like the trees had shifted. I realized that might just be panic talking, but at one point we ended up in a spot we didn't recognize at all, even though we'd only been walking for about 15 minutes total. The ground felt spongy, and I caught a whiff of sulfur like rotting eggs. I kept scanning the area, expecting that tall silhouette to appear again. The hatchet stuck in the stump, the rusted metal, kept flashing in my mind. Somewhere behind us, I heard what sounded like a low chuckle. Not a man's voice, but something deeper and raspier, almost wet-sounding. Dee yanked my jacket, urging me to hurry. We pretty much broke into a run, ducking under branches, tearing through briars. I tripped on a thick root, went sprawling, scraped my palms raw on the dirt. When I looked up, my flashlight caught a reflection on a trunk, like a freshly carved symbol, though I couldn't make sense of it. It had harsh angles and looked almost like an inverted cross with extra lines. Possibly just some weird graffiti, but it didn't look old. It felt like ours, but eventually we saw the glint of the road in the distance. Once we stepped out of the tree line, the heavy feeling lifted, just like someone flipping a switch. I could hear crickets again, a car engine humming somewhere down the road, normal life stuff. We jumped in Dee's car and booked it. My heart was still pounding as we hit the main drag that leads into McMurray. I didn't sleep that night, and for days after I kept having nightmares. They always involved being stuck in those woods, hearing that metallic scraping and seeing that distorted silhouette just out of reach. I visited my aunt in Canonsburg a week later and mentioned what happened in very vague terms, and she brought up how folks in the 1970s used to say you shouldn't go near that patch of forest after dark, that people would hear screaming or see ghostly lights. She said the Hatchet Jack legend goes way back, but no one's sure it's even real. Maybe it's an old wives' tale about a tragedy that got embellished over time. But I'm not the only one who's felt the malevolence in that place. Locals just prefer to keep hush about it. Anyway, I still feel uneasy just recalling it. Whatever is in those woods isn't your run-of-the-mill spook. It felt ancient, or at least powerful enough to freeze us in our tracks. I don't know if it's a spirit tied to Hatchet Jack or a demon feeding on the fear his story generates, or something else entirely. All I know is that if you hear the local kids mention hell in Peters Township, don't assume it's just a campfire tale. There's something very real there, and it doesn't want visitors. I hope whoever listens to this thinks twice before exploring that area. I'm not a big believer in tall tales, but there's something about that old hotel in Picher, New York, in Shenango County, that sticks with a person. I visited a friend there earlier this month. She's been renting one of the rooms in what used to be a grand place back in the 1920s, from what I gather, though it's now basically split into small apartments. Locals still call it the Picher Hotel, even though it hasn't officially operated as one in decades. I was intrigued partly because I'd heard rumors about murder legends in the region, like that story about the woman who was killed by her husband and supposedly roams Pink Hill Road at night. They even say if you drive through on a foggy night, you might spot her figure on the roadside, wearing what looks like a tattered old dress. People claim she's searching for a ride or maybe for her next victim. It depends on which version of the story you hear. Anyway, I'd been curious about that sort of thing for a while. I remember reading about bizarre happenings all over New York, the so-called cursed penthouse on West 57th Street in Manhattan. I've never seen it myself, but I've heard plenty of chatter about tragedies that struck each new tenant. So, this old building in Picher called to me, especially since I happened to be visiting my friend in that neck of the woods. Let me set the scene. The structure itself is 3 stories, with a sagging porch and peeling paint. It sits not far off County Road 36, kind of behind some overgrown shrubs, so you might miss it if you blink. My friend told me the place is rumored to have been a speakeasy during Prohibition, which might explain the weird hidden compartments in the basement. Some folks think the owners back then were up to no good, smuggling booze or who knows what. That alone was enough to get my curiosity piqued. So I show up on a Sunday afternoon. The plan was just to hang out, maybe have dinner, then see if I'd sense anything odd. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was inside. Despite the fact there were a few tenants, I barely heard a peep. No TVs, no footsteps. The hallway had this stale odor, like a mixture of old wood and something metallic. My friend insisted the smell was just from the ancient furnace. Still, I remember thinking it smelled more like old pennies or dried blood, but I didn't want to freak her out. We ended up in her apartment on the 2nd floor. It was decent enough, if a bit claustrophobic. She had some leftover boxes stacked around since she hadn't fully unpacked yet. When night fell, the building took on a whole different vibe. The floorboards creaked more often, as if someone was pacing down the hall, but whenever I checked, it was empty. Around 10 p.m., I swore I heard a faint sobbing sound. My friend said she'd been hearing it every other night and had assumed it was another tenant, except no one was ever there when she'd opened her door. We decided to wander around, see if we could pinpoint the source. The hallway lights were flickering. One of them was burned out entirely, so we used the flashlight on my phone. A neighbor who was stepping out briefly mumbled that we might want to keep to ourselves, as the building has issues. Then he left. That kind of statement just made me more curious, so I kept going. We ended up near what looked like an old supply closet. My friend claimed she'd tried opening it before, but it was always locked. That night, to our surprise, the door was slightly ajar, revealing a short flight of stairs that descended into darkness. We debated whether to go down. Curiosity got the best of me. The stairs creaked so loud I was sure we'd wake someone up, but the entire place remained silent. No voices, no movement. We reached the basement level. The flashlight beam showed a dusty corridor leading to a padlocked door. But here's where it got strange. I started hearing a faint humming sound, almost like a lullaby. My friend said she didn't hear anything, but I was absolutely sure it was there. It reminded me of an old tune from a music box. My skin felt clammy, and I got the sense someone was standing right behind me, even though we were the only ones there. Then I got a flash in my head, an image of a woman in a plain nightgown, her hair matted with something dark, standing by a roadside. Pink Hill, maybe? I'd read that Pink Hill and the road near it were associated with that murdered woman who roams at night. Was it the same woman? My rational side told me I was just spooking myself, connecting 2 local legends that might not be connected at all. But the feeling was overwhelming, like I was tapping into something older than any rumor. A deep sadness and anger combined. That's when something slammed behind us. We whipped around, nobody there, just a puff of dust swirling in the flashlight's beam. The door at the top of the stairs had slammed shut. The hum I'd been hearing abruptly stopped. My friend was shaking, said she felt like we needed to get out of there. So we hustled back up the stairs only to find the door was stuck. It felt jammed or locked from the other side. I put my shoulder into it, thinking maybe it had just wedged itself into the frame. It finally gave way, but when we stepped back into the hall, the place looked different. I can't explain it precisely, but it was like stepping into a corridor that had subtly changed. The ceiling looked higher, the air felt colder, and that stale odor was more pungent. We hurried to her apartment, locked the door, and tried to calm down. I slept over that night. Sleep is a generous term. I mostly laid there wide-eyed. At around 3 a.m., I jolted awake to the sound of footsteps outside, heavy and deliberate. My friend whispered that she could hear them too. They stopped right in front of the door, then nothing. Just silence for a long minute until we heard that same sobbing sound from earlier. Then the footsteps continued down the hall, growing fainter. Neither of us dared open the door this time. The next morning, I asked the landlord if anyone else had reported odd noises. He gave me a strange look, almost like he wasn't surprised, and said people come and go in this building. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't press him. Locals keep hush about the details, but they whisper that her restless spirit ended up in multiple places around Shenango County, as if she can't find peace. Some even claim she has connections to that cursed penthouse on West 57th in Manhattan, though I have no idea how that would even tie in. It's probably just that New York has more than its fair share of ghost stories. All I know is that I've never felt anything as tangible as I did in that old hotel basement. The humming, the slamming door, the weird shift in the hallway. Something is going on there, and it's not just creaky floors in an ancient building. My friend is already planning to move out. She says the vibe has only gotten worse since my visit. She heard more sobbing a few nights after I left, and even saw a shadowy shape cross her living room floor when she went to grab a glass of water. She's convinced it's tied to that violent history, be it local or personal to the building. I'm still a little shaken by it all. I just wanted to tell someone who might actually believe me. If anyone else has had experiences at that old Picher hotel or around Pink Hill Road, I'd love to know I'm not alone in this. Back in late summer of 2021, I was out near the Big Thicket National Preserve in East Texas. My uncle owns a chunk of land out there, and I sometimes go to help him with maintenance. The area is pretty secluded, and there have been strange stories passed around in the area for years. Lights in the sky, weird noises, and people going missing. I never put much stock into them. Until that night. I was out there alone, planning to spend a couple of days helping him clear some brush and check the fences. Around midnight, I started hearing this deep, low-frequency hum. At first, I thought it was some kind of distant machinery, maybe oil drilling or something, but it was rhythmic, almost like it was alive. It wasn't just sound. I could feel it vibrating through the ground. The animals in the area were completely silent, which wasn't normal. Usually you'd hear the occasional coyote or owl, but it was dead silent. I got this overwhelming sense that I shouldn't be there, so I went inside the cabin and locked the doors. A couple of hours later, the hum stopped, and then the voices started. They were low, guttural, almost like a language, but not one I'd ever heard. They were moving outside the cabin, circling it. I swear I could hear them breathing. This heavy, labored sound, like whatever was out there wasn't used to this environment. I peeked out the window, and that's when I saw them. Tall, at least 7 feet, hunched over, with slick-looking skin that reflected the moonlight in a weird way, almost too smooth. Their eyes were yellow, slitted, like a reptile's. They moved in a jerky, unnatural way, as if they weren't used to walking. I froze, not daring to make a sound, but I could feel their presence, their awareness of me inside. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke up at dawn with a splitting headache and a feeling of utter dread. I decided to leave right then and there. On my way out, I noticed something I hadn't before, a road that wasn't on any maps I had. It was perfectly paved, leading deep into the forest, with no signs or markings. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed it. After a few miles, I came to a large, unmarked metal gate with cameras positioned in every direction. No signs, no logos, just cold, military-style fencing. I didn't stay long. Something about that place made my skin crawl. After I got home, I did some digging. Turns out, there have been whispers for years about underground facilities in that area, supposedly tied to the old Montgomery County airfield. Locals say government trucks have been seen at odd hours, and black helicopters fly low over the forest at night. Some people think it's connected to DARPA projects or even older Cold War installations, but there's no solid proof, just speculation and a lot of fear. I mentioned what I saw to a friend of mine who works in the oil industry, and he got real quiet, said I should forget about it. He wouldn't elaborate, just told me to stay out of that area. Said a buddy of his who used to work in government logistics mentioned something about off-the-books operations in East Texas. Things that would make your hair stand on end. Weirdest part? A couple of weeks after my encounter, I started noticing black SUVs parked near my house. They'd sit there for hours, always with tinted windows. And my phone? It started acting strange. Calls dropping, weird static interference. I don't know if I'm being paranoid, but something doesn't feel right. It wasn't just my phone either. My emails started getting flagged for no reason, and every time I would search for anything related to underground bases, my internet would cut out. I started feeling like I was being watched, even in public places. One night, I noticed a drone hovering outside my house, completely silent, just sitting there watching me. When I stepped outside to confront it, it zipped away faster than anything I'd ever seen. The strangest encounter, though, happened a few days later. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of something tapping against my window. When I looked outside, I saw one of those creatures standing in the yard, just staring. It wasn't alone either. There were at least 3 of them, just beyond the tree line, watching. I stayed frozen in bed until sunrise, and when I finally worked up the courage to check, they were gone, but their footprints remained. One thing that still haunts me is what my uncle told me when I finally talked to him about it. He said he's seen those creatures before, years ago when he first bought the land. He thought they were some kind of mutated wildlife, but over time, he noticed patterns, strange markings on trees, mutilated cattle that the local authorities dismissed as coyote attacks, and once, he even found an old rusted-out sign half buried in the dirt that read, "Property of the United States Government." I can't explain what's going on out there, but I know I'm not the only one who has experienced it. I've since spoken with a few other locals who shared similar stories, missing pets, eerie lights in the woods, and even accounts of people disappearing for a few days and coming back with no memory of where they'd been. I don't know what they were, aliens, experiments gone wrong, or something else entirely, but I do know this. The government knows what's out there, and they're doing everything they can to keep it quiet. I haven't been back to my uncle's land since. Some things are better left alone. I don't even know how to start this, and I wasn't going to write at all, but after everything that's happened, I feel like I have to get it out there. I hope someone can make sense of it because I sure as hell can't. This happened last October, near Dulce, New Mexico. My cousin and I were out there because he's really into all the underground base theories and cattle mutilation stuff you hear about in that area. I always thought it was just a bunch of nonsense, but I went along for the trip. We were planning to camp near the Archuleta Mesa for a couple of nights, just to check things out, see if we could spot anything weird. Well, we did. The first night was pretty normal. We set up camp off a dirt road, maybe a mile or 2 from the mesa itself. The wind howls out there in a way that gets under your skin, but other than that, nothing unusual. Around 2 a.m., though, we started hearing these low-frequency hums that sounded like it was coming from deep underground. You could feel the vibrations. My cousin got all excited, saying it was proof of the base, but I just chalked it up to mining operations or something. Looking back, I wish that's all it was. The next night is when things got really strange. We were sitting by the fire talking about UFO sightings in the area when we noticed this strange glimmer in the distance, almost like heat waves, but denser. It moved like it was alive. We both got quiet, watching it. Then it just blinked out. A few minutes later, we heard something moving in the brush behind us. Something big, but the footsteps were off. Almost like it was on two legs but trying to move quietly. I remember the feeling of my stomach dropping. You know that instinctive fear you get when you know something isn't right? Yeah, that. My cousin grabbed his flashlight and shone it into the trees. We didn't see anything at first, but then the light caught a shape. It was tall, lanky, with eyes that reflected back a sickly green. I can't describe it properly, but it didn't look human. It had this distorted, almost pixelated look to it, like it was partially out of phase with reality or something. Then it moved, fast. Faster than anything I've ever seen, and it wasn't running, it was gliding. We bolted, left everything at the campsite and ran back to the truck. We sat there for a good 20 minutes just listening. We could hear it circling us, heavy breathing mixed with that same low humming we'd heard the night before. Finally it stopped, and we took our chance to get the hell out of there. Here's where it gets even weirder. When we got back to town and checked into a motel, two guys in suits were waiting for us in the lobby. I don't know how they knew we were there. They didn't introduce themselves, didn't flash any badges, just said, "We need to talk about what you saw." My cousin, being the conspiracy nut he is, refused, but I was too freaked out to argue. They asked us a lot of strange questions, how long we were out there, if we had any equipment, if we took any samples. Samples of what? They also strongly suggested we head home and forget about what we saw. We didn't need much convincing. The next morning, when we went back to get our gear, the campsite was trashed. Not by animals either. It was like someone, or something, had been looking for something. Our food was still there, untouched, but our bags were ripped apart. Even the ground around our tent looked scorched. We didn't stick around to analyze it. Later that day, we decided to drive around the area and see if we could find anything else. About 5 miles down one of the old logging roads, we came across a fence line with warning signs. Restricted area, no trespassing, government property. We hadn't seen any mention of this on any maps, and my cousin swore it wasn't there last time he visited. There was a strange metallic odor in the air, and every hair on my body stood on end. We didn't dare get any closer, but I swear I saw something moving behind the fence, something too big to be a normal animal. On our way back, we noticed a black SUV following us. It stayed behind us for several miles before turning off down a dirt road. My cousin was convinced they were watching us, and honestly, I don't think he was wrong. The whole thing has been eating at me ever since. I've tried looking up similar sightings in the area, but there's not much, which makes me think someone is actively suppressing this stuff. I keep having this nagging feeling we stumbled onto something we weren't supposed to see. My cousin won't shut up about it, but honestly, I just want to move on. I don't know if you'll believe me, but I had to tell someone. If there's anyone else out there who's experienced something similar in the Dulce area, I'd love to hear from them. Thanks for listening, and be careful if you ever head out that way. I still don't know how to explain what happened to us out there in the remote woods of central Texas, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. But I need to put this down, if only to stop replaying it over and over in my head. This happened a few weeks ago when a group of us, myself and a few friends, decided to do some backcountry camping out near Lake Summerville, in a lesser-known area that's a bit off the beaten path. We were looking to get away from the crowds and camp somewhere more secluded, somewhere we could really disconnect. That was our first mistake. We parked our trucks at a dirt pull-off along a narrow county road and hiked about 5 miles in, deeper into the brush than we probably should have. The woods were thick, mostly oak and cedar, and there were these odd clearings every so often, perfect for setting up camp, or so we thought. The whole hike in, though, something felt off. Not in an obvious way, but like the air itself was heavier. The usual Texas sounds, crickets, distant coyotes, even birds, felt muted somehow. At one point, we passed what looked like an old hunting blind, but it was strange, like it hadn't been used in years, but still looked too intact to be abandoned. We finally found a decent clearing by a small creek, set up our tents, and got a fire going. It was all normal at first. Laughing, beers, the usual. But then, right around dusk, the feeling changed. I can't pinpoint when exactly, but the laughter died down and we all got quieter. It felt like the trees were too close, like they were leaning in. And then the smell hit. I can't even describe it fully, something between rotting meat and stagnant water, with this weird metallic tang in the air. At first, we thought it was a dead animal nearby, but it was strong, and it didn't dissipate. It clung to everything, and no matter which way the wind blew, it stayed with us. We tried to ignore it, but the unease kept building. Sometime around midnight, after we'd all gone to our tents, I woke up suddenly. No sound woke me. Just that gut feeling you get when something isn't right. I laid there, barely breathing, trying to listen, and that's when I heard it. Something moving outside. Not rustling, not an animal sniffing around, but these wet, deliberate footsteps. Slow, calculated. I reached for my flashlight and, without really thinking, unzipped my tent a few inches and peeked out. And there it was. Standing just outside the ring of our campfire's dying light was this thing. It was humanoid, but all wrong. Too long, too thin, with limbs that looked like they'd been stretched beyond their limits. Its skin was slick, almost wet-looking, and had a sickly grayish-green hue that reflected the light in a way that made my stomach turn. The face, if you could even call it that, was the worst part. It had these sunken eyes, black as the night behind it, and a mouth that seemed too wide, like it had been carved into its face. It was just standing there, a little bit hunched over, staring at me with this terrible, intelligent stillness. I wanted to scream, I really did, but no sound came out. It felt like I wasn't supposed to make a noise, like it was daring me to break the silence. Then, without a sound, it stood up taller. It was tall, much taller than I expected, easily 7 feet, maybe more, and its movements were unnatural. Like it was moving in a slow, exaggerated way just to mess with me. It took a few steps backward, melted into the tree line, and was gone. I scrambled out of my tent and shook the others awake, babbling about what I'd seen. They must have seen the look on my face because none of them argued. They just got up, and we all sat by the fire, keeping it as high as possible. None of us slept. We didn't hear it again that night, but I could feel it out there, watching, waiting. At first light, we packed up fast and started hiking out. Or at least, we tried to. Somehow, despite following the GPS and our maps, we kept looping back to the same clearing. It didn't make sense. We're experienced hikers. This shouldn't have happened. The feeling of dread kept growing with each wrong turn, like something was messing with us, leading us deeper in instead of letting us out. We had no choice but to stay another night. That second night was worse, much worse. It started with noises, these awful wet clicking sounds, almost insect-like but too deep. Then, the footsteps again, circling the camp. Our tents were shaken, hard enough to collapse one of them. Whatever it was had no fear of us. We could hear it breathing, this ragged, gurgling sound like something struggling to suck air through wet lungs. We kept the fire roaring all night, but it didn't stop the feeling that at any moment it would step right into the light. We didn't dare move, didn't speak, barely even breathed. It was the longest night of my life. When dawn finally came, none of us wanted to unzip our tents. But when we did, I nearly threw up. Sitting right outside my tent was a skull, but not like any skull I'd ever seen. It was small, maybe the size of a fox or raccoon, but elongated and misshapen, with these tiny, sharp teeth and deep, empty eye sockets that felt like they were staring back at me. We left it there. None of us touched it. The hike out was a blur. We finally found our way back to the truck sometime that afternoon, and as soon as we got in and hit the road, that feeling of being watched faded. Since then, I've done some digging. There are old rumors about the area, stories of missing hikers, odd military presence in the past, strange lights in the sky. Some say there's an old underground facility buried somewhere out there, abandoned but not entirely forgotten. I can't help but wonder if what we saw wasn't something natural. Maybe it wasn't supposed to be there. Maybe we weren't supposed to see it. None of us have been back since, and we don't talk about it much. But I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, in those woods, watching, waiting. If you share this, please keep my name private. I just needed to tell someone who might actually believe me. And if anyone else has been out there near Lake Summerville and seen something, I'd really like to know. I need to know we weren't the only ones. My dear watchers, your presence is a gift. Thank you for your time, your curiosity, your courage. But remember, there are others who wander, unaware of the dangers that await. By liking this video and subscribing, you offer them a light in the darkness. Support our channel and keep the stories coming, simply by giving a thumbs up and subscribing and sharing.